After the disaster in the 1973 outdoor track meet when we just completely collapsed, it dawned on me that maybe we ought to get some better athletes and more of them, and which meant we needed to go and do some serious recruiting. And spent the whole summer, literally, doing nothing but recruiting track and field athletes. And we wound up getting about 12 or 14 really pretty good kids. These are kids who were in the state meet, were all state meet place winners. Mainly from the three smaller classes of schools. I didn't fool very much with Omaha and Lincoln, and we concentrated pretty much on the three smaller classes, with the theory that if a kid is pretty successful at that level, at the state level, from C&D school, BC&D school, that he's probably pretty talented. The chances of, in those days, the B, C, and D schools struggled to get a coach. If they had one coach, a lot of them were lucky. And if they had two, that was extraordinary. And so the bulk of the kids who were really very talented were just that, were talented, and they didn't have very much technical background and knowledge and training and so forth. And so the opportunity then for them to improve at the college level with a adequate amount of instruction from our coaching staff was much greater than it would have been from some kid from Omaha, Burke, or wherever, where they had 4 or 5 coaches and all that. And we were pretty successful in that summer. Boy, it was driven by necessity. We were panicked, and I think I was out on the road almost every day. And we picked up 12, 14 kids who went on and were the backbone of the successes that we had in the next year and 2 years on down the line. And in fact, the matter is, we went from 5th place in the conference to winning the conference 10 of the next 11 years, and set up the idea that Doane was a track and field power, and if you wanted to go to a good track and field school, Doane was a place to go. And I think we developed that pretty early on, and we're very fortunate to pick up some kids who were really pretty good, and that other people didn't, for some reason or other, had overlooked. So I think, yeah, we learned very rapidly that the recruiting of quality athletes is the key to athletic success on the college level. You can have the best coaches in the United States, and unless you got talent to work with, you can just forget it. It's not going to happen. I don't care how good a coach you are. You know, if you think you're going to, on the college level, if you think you're going to out-coach somebody, probably not going to happen. Everybody's pretty good. And so you have to have the talent pool to work with. And as soon as we recognized that and got a few of them, we never got as many as we wanted, but we got a few. And recruiting in those days was a lot different than it is today. I don't know that it's better or worse or the same or whatever, but harder or easier. It's certainly different in the 70s and 80s, and even up into the 2000s. Recruiting was by and large a one-on-one, personal, face-to-face kind of activity. We didn't have the internet. You didn't have Facebook. You didn't have a website for every school in the state having their own website. Information was very hard to get for a college coach to find out what was going on the high school level. Meet results and performances and that kind of thing. Really difficult. There was no TFRS to go to get information. In fact, I would guess that more than a third of the marks that were entered in meets were made up out of the blue, just out of the whole cloth. You just didn't, people just didn't have access to that kind of information. And so you were limited to having a cadre of acquaintances out in the hinterland someplace that would be feeding you information on a particular school or a particular person and how they were coming along. Most of the contact with a high school athlete was either by mail or in person or by phone. And that was it. It was very time consuming. It was not a very efficient way to do things. But it did have the advantage, I think, of people getting to know each other and getting comfortable with each other, and athletes being comfortable with the college coach because he had seen him, 3 or 4 or 5 times personally. The normal operation for me, the normal operation was meet the kid at the high school and spend a half hour maybe with 3 or 4 kids, and he's one of them, and then get the kid to come on the campus. That was the key part of the whole thing. We felt like if we could get kids to visit the campus and spend a day here with us, that the campus would the college would sell itself. And I think that's still true. I think that's still a key thing in recruiting athletes today, is getting them down here, getting them to relate to other people that are on our team, to the coaches, and see what kind of a place it is. And then the third thing was to meet with the parents and the athlete. I don't think I ever gave an aid contract out by mail. Always hand carried it to the home, visited with the parent. Most of the time probably, was with an admissions counselor. And we had, I would have to say, we had some of the best admissions people at that time that we've ever had it known. Individuals, like Cody Vance and Gene Chupin and the Hawk sisters, and even John Green when he was my assistant in the late 70s. John was an admissions counselor, and there were 2 or 3 others that started out as admissions counselors and helped out with our track and field program. So we kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And but anyway, the interaction with the admissions office was very close at that point in time. We would very often go with an admissions counselor to a particular school or to a particular family. And I remember driving out after track practice, left here about 4:30, drove to Lexington with Patty Hawk to recruit Becky Steeb, and who turned out to be a multiple All-American for us, and her parents, and taking the contract out and explaining the whole thing to them. It was it was really a lot of time and like I said, not very cost efficient as far as that goes. In comparison to today, where you have a lot of the recruiting activity goes on via electronic, digital, whatever, computer. I don't understand a lot of that, but the tweeting and Facebook and those kinds of things. That a lot of the current recruiting involves that, which I think is okay, and it's certainly economical. You get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of time used, people's time, just a pure amount of energy that has to be put into it is reduced. Where in the old days everything was, paper and pencil almost. I had a deal where every Sunday, my Sunday afternoon job during the track and field season was to write up a newsletter, and I'd spend most of the afternoon typing it up myself, and then coming over here and running it off on an old ditto machine, old purple ditto machine, taking it back, folding it, sealing it, putting a stamp on it, and addressing. And we sent those to every single coach of every athlete that we had on our team, every high school coach. And then we would send them to the parents of every athlete that we had on our team. We would send them to every recruit that we were recruiting. And that went on every weekend throughout the entire track season. And it was, it wasn't terribly expensive. It was took a lot of my time. That ate up all day Sunday and Sunday night. And it was a not very efficient use of my time, I don't suppose, but I think it was important to keep our name in front of anybody who would be potentially a recruiting source. And I think that doing that really helped us. We would send our schedule posters. Every high school coach in the state of Nebraska got one. And it was just a matter of keeping the name in front of people so that they would, when it came time to really get serious about talking with somebody, they were familiar with what we were and what we looked like, what our uniforms looked like, and so forth. The recruiting in those days really wasn't that tough from a competitive standpoint. The University of Nebraska only went for the really high quality kid. That if you weren't a gold medal winner, they weren't even going to talk to you. They wouldn't even want you as a walk-on. The Big Eight at that time had a 28-man limit on the number of kids that you could enter in their conference meet. So they didn't have room for, and they had no necessity for big numbers. They had a big necessity for pure quality, and so they were involved more with a lot of foreign athletes and getting some kids that could do with 28-man limit and 22 events. You know, you're talking about one person per event. If you wanted to have any kind of depth, you got to have guys who could do a couple, 3 different events. And so they weren't really a big factor as far as competing with us for athletes. And the other teams in the area, UNO never got outside the metro area. Lloyd Cardwell was their coach, and he wouldn't get out of the city of Omaha if you paid him. Woody Greeno at Wesleyan relied pretty much on the Lincoln kids. Lincoln Northeast, Southeast, Pius. That was his. Those 3 schools were the his big source of. Now he would go out occasionally if he thought there was a kid out, you know, at Stromsburg or someplace that was pretty good. He'd go out and try and recruit them. But by and large, he relied pretty much on the Lincoln cadre of talent, pool of talent. And Kearney was kind of the same way. You never saw them east of Grand Island. They would be strictly out in the western part of the state. So, and the out-of-state colleges rarely would come in. Northwest Missouri, South Dakota U, South Dakota State, Fort Hays, those kind of people had no presence, hardly any presence in the state of Nebraska in track and field recruiting. Just wasn't done. They were doing their own thing wherever they were. So really, it wasn't that big a deal. And very frankly, some of the coaches, some of the schools just didn't care. They didn't work at all at it. They were almost, if a kid walked in the door, that would be fine, but they weren't going to go out and spend the time and the effort. And we did. I mean, we spent a lot of time and effort. I cannot tell you the number of times when I'd leave practice at 6 o'clock, jump in the car, drive to York or Grand Island or someplace, see a kid and his parents, drive back that night, and no supper, no nothing, just go and do it. And those were days that I think the interpersonal relationships that developed. When I went out on a recruiting trip, I would stop at schools that I knew didn't have anybody that I was interested in, just on a basis of stopping, seeing the coach, saying, "Hey, hi, how are you? You know, and you got anybody? You know anybody around?" And just making that contact, and that paid off over a period of time. Now it was a pain in the backside to do it because it was a lot of work, and it was I don't know. I think it helped us in the long run in that people became familiar with Doane and related it to track and field. And in fact, I just talked to a guy who was stopped in to see me yesterday. And he's here for football camp. And he had been a coach at Aurora for a long time, track coach at Aurora. And he said, after a while, he said, we just came to the idea that if you said track, you said Doane. And that was all there was to it. and we had good cooperation from our admissions people. They really would go out and they would actively try and find people that were interested in continuing their athletic career in track and field, and then come back and say, hey, I talked to so and so. Is he any good? And then some of the more knowledgeable guys would know whether a time was good or bad, but they weren't afraid to go out and talk to people for you. And we had by and large, over the years, I cannot fault our admissions people. We had a pretty good relationship to them. And now, sometimes it was a little scary. One time we were out, Cody Vance and I were out, went out to McCook to talk to somebody, and I cannot tell you who the kid was. I don't think he ever wound up coming, but and we were driving back, and it's early evening, just getting dark. And we stopped at Kearney, get a cup of coffee, and got back on the road, and we weren't on the road. Interstate 80, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just past Gibbon. And here comes a deer up out of the ditch, just smashed the front end of that car. Glass all over. And all I can remember to do is looking back and seeing the back end of that deer bouncing off the back end of the car. And I'm amazed Code kept it on the road, because it was a pretty major crash. And the car was disabled. We got it to the next exit, which was Wood River, I think, and got it off the highway, and he called the sheriff and to report it, and the guy came out and said, well, I don't think you guys ought to be driving this car, and no kidding. So there's a little old motel there just off the interstate, a mom and pop kind of motel. It wasn't a national chain or anything. So we went down there and got a room, and he called Pappy Curry, and was a director of admissions then, and a business manager maybe. Anyway, and Pappy said, well, he said, I'll send somebody out in the morning to pick you guys up, and we'll have the car towed in. And I said, what's the point in towing that car in? It's a junk. And but they did, and they got it repaired, and we got, Chupan came out and picked us up the next morning. But it was a pretty exciting evening, and you know, those were not uncommon kinds of things. That if you traveled any amount, you were bound to run into different kinds of, you know, weather, storms, and conditions, and that would create kind of an exciting situation. One time, Bob Erickson, wanted a basketball player from Grant, Nebraska, and we were recruiting Kenny Marvin from McCook. And so Erickson gets this bright idea that we're going to fly out there. And he gets Harley Brookmeyer as a banker down in Dorchester, and has a small plane out here at Crete Airport. He talks Brookmeyer into going out and flying us out there to Grant and McCook. Well, I wasn't real keen on the getting in that plane with those guys, but we get in this little Piper Cub thing and fly out there, and it's not too bad. And we get out to Grant, and they got a runway there that looks like a postage stamp. And you're going to try and land on that? And, yeah. And the wind it's only a single runway, and so the wind is coming crosswind, and he got one wing dragging on the ground almost, trying to keep it airborne, and swallowing pretty much, and I just. But we got it on the ground, and we got to the administration office there, and they said, well, we have a courtesy car if you want to take it into town. And I said, okay. And we go out there, and there's about a 1947 Buick pickup truck. And we drove that thing into town, and people, one of the two guys in shirt and tie, trucking down in this old beat-up truck. And we went and went to the school and did our visit, and went back. And he had to reverse the whole process now to take off. He's got this crosswind, and he's just struggling with it. And you got your heart in your mouth about half the time. Flew over to McCook, and Kenny and his parents met us at the airport there, and went over to their house and did the recruiting visit there. And then flew back to Crete, and but it was we never did that again. It was a one-time deal. So that, there was some excitement in the whole thing, some uncertainty in it, and certainly recruiting is not a certain thing. It's an uncertain thing any way you cut it, whether it's the travel or just parents making up their mind, or the athlete making up his or her mind, and that kind of thing. It's always an iffy kind of deal. I don't know that it was any more difficult one way or the other. Now, I do think that the athletes, two things that are significantly different. Well, number one, there was a bigger pool of high school athletes in track and field in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s, to draw from. You didn't have the effect of specialization at the high school level or the junior high level, and you didn't. Most kids were two-sport athletes at that point, and I think that today, with as much specialization as we have, even on down as far as the junior high level, where kids are encouraged to specialize in one sport, and I think that has diluted the pool of decent athletes for track and field. Track and field is not going to be real high on a lot of kids' totem poles as far as a sport to pick. They get into it by default. That finally dawns on them that they're not going to make the starting 5 or the starting 11 or whatever, and so they move to track and field as a secondary backup plan. And I think that there in the 70s and 80s, we had a really good pool of athletes to draw from. If you look at the state championship track meet, gold medal winner and class winners, those are pretty good marks right now. But the depth and quality depth in track and field is poorer than it was in the 70s. You could get kids that, we wouldn't even look at a kid that wasn't 50 flat quarter miler. 50 flat quarter mile in a state meet, you're winning the state championship today in many classes. And I think the kids themselves had a more realistic understanding of what it took to be successful at the college level than kids are today. And that's not the athlete's fault, but they're conditioned to a point where they're thinking a particular performance is college level performance, and they're not very realistic as far as that's concerned. I was just reading today where some kid that signed with the University of Nebraska. Now this is the Big Ten, and this guy is like 11th in the state cross country meet and fourth or fifth in the state Class A meet. Ain't gonna make it at the college level, at that level, at the Big Ten level. Not going to be competitive. But people have become, I think, a little unrealistic in what is a competitive mark and what isn't, and what level, where do they fit in this whole scheme of, Division I to NAIA, whatever, and what it takes to be successful, at our level and the other levels. That realism, I think, has been lost. I really do. We have males, 5-minute milers, wanting a scholarship. 5-minute mile isn't that's not a good woman's performance, much less a men's. And so you have some people who have unrealistic ideas as to what's really competitive at the collegiate level. And part of that is in the relationship of athletics recruiting and general student recruitment, and the movement, I think, on the part of many colleges, and Doane is one of them, to utilize athletics recruiting as a major, to provide a major number of students, just to put people in the seats of the college, and not thinking about their quality of performance in a given sport. I think that we were much more concerned in the 70s and 80s with quality of performance when we recruited kids. Now they're much more concerned with getting their quotas in recruitment, and I think that has, in my opinion, that simply increases mediocrity in your program. You can't have a high-quality program with high-quality performances with that kind of an attitude to just get numbers. And I think it has diluted the quality of our athletic programs. I really do. It's in direct opposition to what we always in the past had thought of as our role. Our role was to produce the best possible performers that we could, and not be terribly concerned with how many of them. Now, certainly you have to have enough to cover the numerical demands of a particular sport. And that varies, of course, from sport to sport. That was one of the advantages I always thought that Erickson had in basketball. With only 5 guys on the court at one time, he didn't have to have 100 kids out for basketball. In fact, he preferred to have a small but a very high quality team. And I think we've gotten away from that idea, at least at this level, at this, whatever level we're known as at. We've gotten away from the idea that we're going to try and provide the best athlete that we can and for our programs, and really get after the high quality performance down the line. Now, I still think that today, from what I see anyhow, in many of our events, the number one guy is pretty good. You know, you got Cale Woken. He would be good in any era that we've had. You know, when you jump, whatever, 24 feet or 25 or whatever he's jumped, and that kind of thing, and Tatum and some of those kinds of people would be good at any era, and but the quality depth that we have, and we have some depth, but we don't have very much quality depth. And I think the reason we don't have it is this idea of having recruiting quotas and numerical, a pure base number that we have to recruit every year. I think that's detrimental to the quality of our athletic program and here. And that's my opinion. I don't necessarily mean it's true, but it's what I believe. You know, some of the recruiting is just dumb luck. Really, I mean, I'm pure and simple. We got in '74. We picked up 3 transfers within a week that all wound up, 2 of them wound up being national champions. All of them wound up being All-Americans. We're talking about showing the flag and going to high schools, and even if they weren't Rick Cotton was a pole vaulter for Gearing High School, and Rick was, tried to recruit him, and I drove out to Gearing 2 or 3 times. Well, we didn't get him, and he went to Texas El Paso, and he didn't like it, just hated it. I don't know this. Of course, we don't know what's going on. Texas, I've forgotten all about him, to be honest with you. Out of sight, out of mind. And one day I get a telephone call, and the coach at Gearing High School, he said, hey, you tried to recruit Cotton. And I said, yeah, when he was a senior. And I said, yeah. He said, I just saw him on the street. And I said, well, how's he doing? He said, he just hates Texas El Paso, and he's not going back. And if you get out here, I think you could recruit him again. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. I jumped in the damn car, drove out there. This is really an inefficient way for a coach to work, but I spent a whole day driving out there. And I got a hold of Cotton, took him to dinner that night, and told him that we would be glad to have him, and we would be able to help him financially and scholarship-wise. Sold him right there on it. He was looking for a place to go with a less of a pressure atmosphere, more of a team atmosphere, and I talked him into coming. And he went on and won 2 national championships for us, and his indoor record still stands from 1978, whenever that was. No more than a week later, I get a telephone call from the coach at McPherson College, a guy named Art Ray. And Art and I had known each other for, we had competed against each other for a while. And he said, hey, I'm moving on to out of coaching. I'm going into whatever banking business or something. And he said, we got a pretty good half-miler down here named Fred Wilson. And he's an All-American, NAIA All-American 800-meter runner. And he said he doesn't want to stay because they aren't going to name another coach for whatever period of time. And he said he's looking. And I said we'd be happy to have him. He said I'll bring him down. He brings him down. Kid's here one day. Sign him, and it's a done deal. Within a week of that, I'm walking into the admissions office, and one of the admissions gals says, hey, coach, she said, I got a guy here that says he's a pretty good cross-country runner. And I said, oh, yeah? And I walked back there, and here's a kid named Keith Driftmeyer, who was a student that ran for Midland College. And had got crossways with whoever the coach was at that time, McMahon, I suppose. And he said, I'm looking to move, and he said, I know you guys put on a pretty good program, and he said, your kids, I've visited with your athletes, and he said, they seem to be my kind of guys, and so we talked about it for a while, and he decided to come. And he, even though he had to sit out a year because of the conference school, but I've never had a 3-week period like that where I just fell into 2 national champions, and Wilson won the NCAA Division III championship, and Cotton won both the NAIA and the Division III. And Driftmeyer was still is on a distance medley relay school record team. I got, I think, second in national meet in '78. Those, you don't have very many years like that, but you do occasionally fall into something, and dumb luck is always a good thing for you. I'd rather be lucky than good, I guess. The point, I guess, all of it is that it was a lot more. In the old days, it wasn't a very efficient way to do things, but it was effective from the standpoint that you got to know the athlete personally before you made any real commitment one way or the other. Either they made a commitment or you made a commitment. You got, I think, a little bit better handle on the people because you were face to face with them, and it's pretty hard. It's a lot easier to ignore a text. But if I'm sitting there facing you, you can't hardly ignore me. You got to respond. And so from that standpoint, I think it was pretty good, although not efficient, because, you'd spend a whole day maybe and talk to one kid out on the road traveling someplace. And now you might stop at 5 schools and see one kid. But you always made the point of going to the coach, talking to him, getting, if he has a meet results or something, getting some kind of interaction between the two of you so that they know you and they know you're tuned in on track and field. I think it was really important for our program for high school coaches to understand that we were really passionate about track and field here. That it wasn't just a a thing that take up the space between basketball and the end of school. And that was really, we were really working at it and interested in people performing at a fairly high level. We had some pretty good kids in those days. I think that the drop in the quality pool of high school athletes has hurt track and field big time, nationwide. I don't think it's not a unique problem here. I think this is a nationwide program where kids who are volleyball players. We used to get, half our volleyball team would be running track and field, and just don't see that anymore. And that we weren't alone. I mean, this is not a unique situation for Doane. This is a situation that transpired and transpires all over. I've talked to coaches fairly frequently, and they're all saying the same thing. They're just not the pool of athletes out there because they just didn't get involved in track and field. And I know my son coaches in Minneapolis, and he coaches the distance kids, and the distance runners are probably the poorest athletes in track and field. Half of them can't walk and chew gum at the same time. But and he's even saying, hey, we're losing kids that want to play club soccer because it's going to help their performance to get a scholarship or whatever, and the chances of them getting aid at the college level. So this specialization in one sport at an early age, I think, is the worst thing that could possibly happen to athletics, because there's only so many slots out there. And if a kid is discouraged early, then the chance of him dropping out of athletics altogether is much better. And so I think from that standpoint, it was better in the 70s and 80s for both the college and for the athlete, where he or she would play 2 or 3 sports and enjoy them, and then become a better athlete in general, and we would then profit from that by being able to recruit, decent athletes.